Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Carmen Duro. I'm an attorney from Massachusetts. I have been practicing law for 54 years. For about 30 of those years, I've been involved in cases involving sexual abuse. It's been the primary part of my practice for the past 20 years. In 2002, I was involved with the Boston Archdiocese cases in which 552 people came forward to make claims against the Archdiocese. After that, I dealt with claims against the Fall River Diocese, the Worcester Diocese, and the Springfield Diocese, and several religious orders. I am a graduate of Sacred Heart Grammar School, Central Catholic High School, and Holy Cross College, so I don't come to this as an anti-Catholic. On the contrary, one of the things the Jesuits taught me in the theology classes is that the obligation of a Christian is to, before you pay your debts, before you do works of charity, that the very first thing you must do is to make recompense to the people you've harmed. And that's a lesson that I've repeated many times to clergy members who don't seem to have learned the same lesson themselves. I want to say to you, I was involved in the writing of the statute of limitations law in Massachusetts, which passed in June of 2014. It's 4.5 years later. Contrary to all the predictions, the sky did not fall as a result of passing this kind of legislation. People have gotten along very well in spite of that, and hundreds, thousands of people have been able to come forward and tell their stories. I want to respectfully suggest to you, though, that you not give the Catholic Church more power than it actually has. The people who abuse children, mental health professionals will tell you this, are people who focus in on the places where there's the most kids, what they call youth-serving organizations. The Catholic Church is one such place, but only one of many, and the opportunities for that are diminishing rapidly in the Catholic Church as people take their children away from the opportunities or don't give the same deference to priests that they did when I was a young boy. I ask you to consider that carefully, because the legislation that you're being asked to pass, and which I speak in favor of, is aimed at protecting children in all venues. I had a case involving a pediatrician at Children's Hospital, and we identified over 100 victims of sexual abuse by that pediatrician. Excuse me. I was involved in the St. George's case here in Rhode Island. An interesting thing about that case, one of my clients was sexually abused by, happened to be a priest, but it could have been, he was an Episcopal priest, but it could have been anybody who was teaching there because he was a teacher. And the client told me that one of the things that had happened to him was that he was abused on a trip to Boston on one special occasion. I said to him, you know, it may well be that you can still prosecute him because he left the state afterwards, and that told the criminal statute of limitations. And so some 40 years later, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office prosecuted that man. As a result of prosecuting him, 2 people in North Carolina, where that priest had gone subsequently, heard about the prosecution. The officers from North Carolina arrested him at the end of his prison term in Massachusetts and brought him back there. When they brought him back to North Carolina, 2 other people came forward that he had abused there. Statutes of limitations that are broad and open opportunities mean that there will be opportunities for people who otherwise don't have a chance to get justice, to get that justice. That's really what you're being asked to do here. It's not about the Catholic Church. It's not about any particular organization, the Boy Scouts or anything else. It's important that you look at this. It's important that you say to the lobbyists for the Catholic Church, you aren't going to be the tail that wags the dog. And that's very important. They don't deserve the power to control whether or not this legislation passes. You're doing this for all the children. And let me say, if I may, one thing more about the age at which people come forward. A 74-year-old man called me from Arizona. He said to me, I was sexually abused when I was 6 years old. He said, I kind of put it aside, didn't think about it. About a year ago, I started remembering the event vividly and having nightmares every night. My wife said to me, if you don't do something about this, I'm going to leave you. She meant it only as a way of getting him to deal with it. He dealt with it, it helped him, and he was able to get justice even later. A month ago, a 90-year-old woman contacted us and said that she was abused when she was very young, and she couldn't bring herself to do anything about it while she was married. Her husband had just passed away, and now, before she died, she had to do something about the circumstances of her abuse. Fortunately, I see more people coming forward at an earlier age, like this very brave gentleman right here. But there are still many people who can't come to grips with this thing until later in their lives. There are a lot of reasons why they come to grips with it later. A 51-year-old police officer called me 2 days ago, and he said, I had to start dealing with this now, even though I've been a police officer for years and I've dealt with sexual abuse situations as a police officer, because my son is 8 years old, and I was 8 years old when I was abused, and I suddenly had this overwhelming fear that my son was unsafe because I was unsafe when I was 8 years old. The people who go to Alcoholics Anonymous go through a step, I think it's the fourth step, where they talk about their lives. Numerous people come to me after that fourth step and say, I was talking about my life and the abuse thing came up, and people said to me, don't you understand? You're an alcoholic because you were abused as a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old. You're not here because you're an alcoholic. And Alcoholics Anonymous is filled with people who've been sexually abused. I get people who have been to jail, and they get out of jail, and they want to turn their lives around. And they come and talk to me about having been abused as children. The jails are filled with people who have been sexually abused as children. Society pays an enormous cost for the sexual abuse of our children. We must hold the institutions responsible that have the opportunity to do something about this. It would be nice if the church or the Boy Scouts or all the other organizations which preach about values that we all should have, would live by those values when these things arise. But in fact, we know from history that they put the interests of the institution before anything else. The Boy Scouts adopted a rule which says that no scoutmaster can ever be alone with a child. There always must be a second adult if you're alone with a child. They did not do that until they had been sued and paid enormous amounts of money. I would be happy if I never saw another sexual abuse case. But I know that's not going to happen. And I know that institutions are not going to change their behaviors unless they see that the failure to change the behavior will have greater consequences for them than doing the right thing. I hope this bill passes. Thank you.